Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
She is. Hello, Emily. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Where are you located again? I forget.
I'm up north of Quebec.
Oh, cool.
That's
Yeah, so
awesome.
like 8 hours drive from Montreal, really small town.
Oh, nice. And then obviously, Diwesh.
How's it
Yes,
going?
nice to meet you.
Nice
Diwesh
to
is
meet you, Emily.
in a cabin somewhere in the woods. I just found out. Yeah. So pretty much, Emily, anything you possibly want help with, Diwesh and I are here to help. So like literally anything you can think of, we can talk about strength and conditioning. We can talk about gym stuff. We can talk about culture. We can talk about your own stuff, like whatever you want help with, we're more than happy to do it. And we'll just go from there.
Okay, so yeah, I've been on vacation for the last week, so my brain is just shut off right now. So
Jumping back in.
I'll go with the flow, but I think a big challenge for me has been for the power in the legs, the very specific power for the leaps. So we have really good active flexibility. We do have power, like the vault is really good. I think my girls are good on tumbling too, but that specific strength or power is really hard for me to practice. And I think I struggle a little with not being too specific with my PP. So I go a lot with things that I think will be specific, and sometimes I think I forget the bigger picture or the more general stuff that you would do with weights or whatever.
Yep.
And I've been reading your stuff on the shift page, and some articles were talking about the ankle weights. So that's another thing that I was questioning about the things we're using. We didn't use them much, but I just think I need more ideas to work that part.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, you're definitely in the right place for that. I think we can totally help out with that to start with. So yeah, let me quickly just ask a few questions about like the girls you're working with, or the team and the ages, stuff like that, just so we can kind of frame the conversation. And then I'll definitely tackle the ankle weights real quick. And then I think Diwesh can probably do a better job of explaining the role of like general prep versus specific prep. We'll kind of go back and forth there. So first is what age of athlete do you work with?
Right now, I have maybe 11 to 17.
Okay.
So as I said, it's a small town, so I go like larger range because my girls are level 7 to 9 right now, which is kind of rare up here. So I go with the bigger range in the age to stay with the higher level gymnasts. But I'm also the head coach of the club, so most of the things I want to be able to translate them to the lower levels and maybe the younger kids doing level 4, 5, 6 maybe.
Yep, absolutely. And it actually works out perfectly because that's literally the exact same club age and demographic that I coach. And then also that we have a ton of at Champion too, the facility where Diwesh and I work. So it's like perfectly in the wheelhouse of what we're working with. How many days per week do you guys train?
For the summer, we do 4. Usually we do 5. It works with the school days. So they train every school day.
Okay. And then how many days or how many hours per day do you guys usually train?
On the regular season, they will do 3 hours in the morning because that's all the school's going to give us. And then we'll do some nights 2 hours to go with 20 hours a week. During the summer season, we do 3.5 hours for the 4 days. So that's a bit less.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah, just so I kind of understand the overall demographics. Diwesh, do you have any questions about the background stuff before I talk about ankle weights or no?
No, those are really the big ones that I was going to ask for the time, the age group. Cool. It's kind of the big one.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So the ankle weight situation, Emily, is I think the reason that ankle weights aren't the best for jumps and leaps and stuff is because the cost to reward ratio. So I'm sure you might've seen on the website and stuff that the idea is like, if you have a weight that's really far away from the hip joint, the amount of distance between the hip and the ankle is really far relative to the hip joint. So the farther you put a weight away from the hip joint, the more like total force it can produce on the hip joint, right? So the reason that might be a problem is the smaller muscles of the hip, right? Like the stabilizers and especially the smaller hip rotators, they can't really keep the hip joint in a good snug position when you have weight, even if it's like 2 or 3 pounds. The amount of force that it puts on the hip joint is a ton relative to how long their legs are. So like if you put an ankle weight on your wrist and you spun around really fast, your shoulder would feel pretty terrible after a while, right? Because it's putting so much stress on your shoulder joint. It's the same thing with hips. So when people are trying to put weights on the legs, like specifically the ankles, it's possibly going to help with active flexibility, but it might cost too much in the long run in terms of like hip stress. And like it's I've just seen so many kids that they get hip flexor strains, they get hamstring strains, particularly when their growth plates are open. It can pull quite a bit on the growth plate because the contraction is so high to control the ankle weight. But then also it can kind of irritate some of the ligaments and possibly the labrum, the deeper hip joint stuff. And so I do know some people who like they'll wear shoes, like when they do endos or stalders for positional awareness. I think that's okay in the right dosage. And I think sometimes with really advanced athletes, you can use ankle weights for like core conditioning and rope climbs and stuff like that. But I think you have to take a really big step back and think about why someone isn't performing with jumps and leaps or active flexibility the way that you want, to kind of understand the situation. And then you kind of see why ankle weights are probably not the best option. And I'll give you some other options. So in general, you said that your active flexibility is good, right? To get good leaps and jumps, you need to be able to jump high enough and then have good active flexibility, right? That's really what it comes down to is the passive flexibility becomes active flexibility. And then if you have good active flexibility, but you can't jump high enough, you can't be in the air long enough to show whatever leap it is and then get back down to the ground, right? Without, falling. So it's either like, okay, do we have a problem with jump height and jump power, or do we have a problem with passive flexibility, which would also be active flexibility? So if your kids have good passive flexibility on the floor and then they can do kicks, they can do jumps, they can do stuff, in tumble track, and they show full range of motion, well, you have a problem with jump height time, right? You don't have a problem with active flexibility. And so the first kind of piece of it is that, like, if you were to say theoretically, I want to use ankle weights, that's not going to help with jump time, right? That's only going to help with getting their legs to a bigger angle. But swinging your leg with an ankle weight is really a way of kind of cheating a little bit, because you're using momentum and gravity to get your leg up higher. You're not actually using muscular contraction. So really what you're doing is just stretching things more at end range. And that's kind of concerning. If you were, say you do have athletes down the road, or maybe a couple in this group do struggle a little bit with active flexibility, you can do band resistance stuff is probably a much more useful way. And you can just cut the band length to their legs in a split on the floor, and it will mimic the very similar distance in the air, right? So that could be an argument for someone who would use bands or things like that to kind of get that extended range of motion. But it's constant tension throughout the band across their legs. It's not like all the weight on one end of their limb that might stress out their hip joint. So I think bands are a really good option. The other piece of it too that a lot of people sometimes miss is if somebody can't get their leap angles in the air, right? They oftentimes don't need more resistance. They need less resistance, right? They need something to help them get their full range of motion to bridge that gap from what they don't have to that last little bit. So say they can only get 160 in the back, an ankle weight is going to make it harder, or a band is going to make it harder to get 180. So I would instead actually use a band to help them get to end range. I would actually use the band assisted for a couple of weeks till they get stronger, take the band away and go against gravity. And then I would finally add the band back on. But that's kind of not our problem here, but a lot of people struggle with that. So, so for you, the problem tends to be jump height, right? Which is kind of where this whole conversation comes from. And I know some people who will put like weight vests on, and they'll put weight, like, ankle straps around the waist. And that is an okay option if it's done in the proper context of a bigger picture of a program, right? Because you're starting to add some external load to get a little higher. There's a time when like seated dumbbell jumps, as Diwesh will talk about, or like vest jumps might be a good option. But I think, again, the problem is like, that's like taking a sliver of a bigger program and just pulling it out and going crazy. People just do tons of jumps and tons of leaps with vests on or weights on, and they just jump and jump and jump and jump, versus taking a step back and thinking about the science of what makes somebody jump higher. You know what I mean? And so that's
Yeah.
kind of the big picture I have with the ankle weights and stuff like that. The other piece that Diwesh will definitely talk on is it seems like your kids are really good at this velocity, right? Like horizontal velocity with sprinting and tumbling is a very different development than vertical velocity. And
Yeah.
so that's something I see a lot in gymnastics too. People are doing a ton of sprint training and a ton of squats and a ton of like different sprint variations or broad jumps, but they're really not understanding, you know, like direct glute training or some different types of vertical jump work. And so they have kids that can run really fast, but not jump really high. And I think that's, again, where you have to kind of take a step back and understand the different ways to approach this. So I don't know. Would you have any questions about my kind of stuff before Diwesh maybe shares a little bit?
No, I think it sums up how I feel about them, like the active flexibility. We've been working with the bands and stuff like that, so I think we're on the right track there. But it's really about the time in the air for their jump, because we've been having like no big problems for level 7, 8, but now that they're trying to do like rotations with their leaps, now we're really feeling that time is not enough to do the good amplitude,
Yep.
yeah, and the rotation. So that's where I really feel that they need to go higher. So yeah, that's the big problem.
Yeah, Diwesh, so you want to take over a little bit and just chat about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off what Dave said, it does seem like the issue is definitely a little bit more vertical power, right? So Dave kind of mentioned like, you know, sprinting, broad jump, that type of stuff. What we've kind of learned from some of the research is power is very plane specific, right? So we can be really good at developing power in general, but if it's not the specific plane that we need it to be in, it might not actually transfer to the skills that we need, right? So now what we got to start thinking about is how do I build vertical power, right? What are the components of vertical power and how do we build those individually, right? So kind of similar to what you guys talked about, you know, for us to make a good pass, like you got to be able to get high enough, demonstrate active flexibility. So what we do there is we build the two separately, right? We build the passive flexibility, we attack the active flexibility separately, and then we work on the power separately as well. So now it turns out that even in that power section, right, even that power category, we got to break that down a little bit further to see what actually is power, right? And we talk a little bit about this in the course, so it'll be a good refresher for you when you get back in there. But the big components that dictate how much power you can create with your lower body and your legs is, one, do you have enough musculature, right? So if someone doesn't have the musculature, that means your total potential for power is going to be less, right? So a lot of times I often think about like, you know, they see big muscles on someone and they say, oh, it's a bodybuilder. They're not, you know, they're not functional. They can't really like be athletic because their muscles are too big, right? That may be true to a certain extent. And it's not always the case that if you're big muscles, that you're automatically going to be more powerful. But what it allows us to say is that a bigger muscle has the potential to be a stronger muscle. And then a stronger muscle has the potential to be more powerful, right? So let's start stripping away at the layers of this. So I think step one, right, is build muscles that are big enough where they have the potential to create force, right? Force just means however much energy is required to make a movement happen, right? It doesn't matter if it's slow or fast. Force to us initially is just, you know, we got to be able to have enough force. If I want to push this desk right in here in front of me and it takes 60 pounds of force, right? I need to generate 60 pounds or 61 pounds of force to get it moving, right? It doesn't matter if I do it fast or slow. So that's kind of step one. I got to build the force ability to make something move, right? So in our situation, it'd be our body weight plus gravity, right? So as a gymnast, that's it. That's the force. So if our force is higher, right, that means that I can make my body move in space a higher distance, right? AKA jump height. So now the other piece of this puzzle is the velocity at which we do it, right? And it seems like from what I'm kind of understanding, it seems like the velocity is probably more so what's missing from you guys, because if you have enough force to be able to you know, let's say run fast, right? Let's say on the track you can run very fast. That requires a lot of force, right? That means that you're probably not having your athletes produce enough velocity with that high force, which probably means that we're missing a little bit of what we call elasticity, right? Or joint stiffness at the right timing and at the right positions to be able to kind of jump up off the ground very, very quickly, right? So imagine like very little knee bend, and then you smash yourself into the ground and then float, right? It seems like that last elasticity piece is what you're missing. So what I would program is, let's say earlier on, if I'm trying to build someone's engine, I might start off with some seated dumbbell jumps, but don't stop there, right? That's going to be just enough to build enough of the force production capability for athletes. But what we got to probably move towards is more, are you familiar with pogo jumps? Like more elastic movements. So imagine like so this is the ground, right? Imagine like as soon as you hit the ground, right, you're quickly bouncing off the ground. So we're training a little bit more quicker ground contact time and like more stiffness. So a pogo jump, or different variations with different amounts of knee bend, like a plyo hurdle jump, we call it, right? We're having to kind of manipulate how much knee bend is required to jump up really high, but also jump up off the ground really quickly. So that's kind of what we got to trend you towards, it seems like, right? To build the engine initially with, our squats, our deadlifts, our hip lifts, our lunges, all that stuff to create the force, right? Like we need to push that desk away. But I think this is perfect, right? So you'll see here, Jem, our former student, is doing some weighted pogo jumps, some quick ground contact time. And then, from here is going to get higher effort so that even with that quick ground contact time, we're going to get up higher and higher off the ground, right? So this seems like this is probably what you need a little bit more of, right? And then you can kind of fluctuate the intensity depending on how beginner or advanced someone is. So if I have like a level 9, level 10 athlete, right, I would say in that video, Jen was doing it at like a medium to low intensity there because she had weights in her hands. What I would, coach my kids to do would be, get rid of the weights, use an arm swing to help you create a little bit more momentum and keep that same short ground contact time, but now get up off the ground really, really high, right? So an easy test for you to start doing with your athletes is, let's say you do a seated without dumbbells, right? You do like a seated jump up in the air, and with just your eye, right? Just using your coaching eye, you can kind of see how high that athlete gets off the ground, right? Your goal should be eventually, as I get my athletes to be a little bit more advanced and I want to really train that elasticity, is I want to have that really quick ground contact time and still have my athlete get up almost as high without as much of a load position, right? So that seated position is a big loaded position. I have deep knee bend, deep ankle bend, deep hip bend, and I'm able to use and utilize all of these muscles to propel myself off the ground. So that's like a long ground contact time jump. For you, it seems like we're missing that elasticity. So what we would start programming in is going to be pogo jumps and really coach the intent of it so that they know to be really forceful and aggressive on these jumps. And you're almost looking to get them almost to the same height as their max vertical jump.
That's interesting, Dewey. So you'd want to see someone do a seated jump the same way as like a giant hurdle hop, almost the same distance, because one is a measure of more the force and one's more the measure of velocity.
Right. So someone who's very good at being elastic is going to be very, very good at using their tendons to create that stiffness to propel themselves off the ground almost as high as if they're using like max effort force to get them up there. Right. So a really well-trained engine can kind of do both, right? Or at least not be too far behind. What we see is athletes kind of are good at one and not as good as the other. And we're always trying to like bridge that gap to get them closer and closer. So my less elastic athletes, right, they're not going to be able to hit the ground and then jump off the ground very, very quickly and as high. So we start training that to get them up to kind of meet to their max capacity for jumping.
Right. Interesting. Emilie, I have a clarification kind of on the gymnastics side is when you guys are doing jumps by themselves or like leaps by themselves, is it the first jump or leap? Because that's more of a force component when you step on one leg and squat and jump as high as you can. But then when you connect them, that one's very much the elasticity component. So do you notice that the first jump is the issue or the connected jumps are the issue?
I guess it would depend on the girl, but mostly I think it's the first one, mostly the jumps with one leg. So the rebound is usually good. I would say maybe the jumps that starts with two leg, but not rebound, like just starting from there and jumping, and the leaps that are one legged. So the second jump usually would be okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
you might have a
So
difference of athlete here that like some
yeah.
more, but
So let me backtrack.
yeah, that was going the other way for me, Diwesh. That's why I
Yeah.
wanted to.
Okay. No. So that's an awesome question, Dave. So that actually clarifies a lot for me. That's an important question that I've already forgot to ask you. So it seems like your athletes, for the most part, is the exact opposite of what I said. So
But
they're probably really
still,
good at elastic.
I think for the jumps that are starting with 2 feet, like I don't even know the names with the
Okay.
English, but you
Right.
know, straddle turn
Mhm.
or things like that would be a little good for me to still work on the pogo and seated jumps and mostly seated jumps, I guess, for
Yeah.
those jumps.
And I wonder
Yeah.
about this,
So
Diwesh. This is kind of a bigger picture because I think what happens is plyos in the gymnastics world are just trained like tons of spring floor jumps, so panel mats and
mhm.
jumps. So I think the athletes learn how to be stiff and create body tension, but their elasticity is not great. So if we put them on like a beam or a general training floor, I think they'd be like, you know, flopping all over the place. But on a spring floor, I think they've learned how to adapt because they've done it for so long. So I still think they have an
Got it.
elasticity component that they could train and get better at, which is why a lot of the athletes at Champion feel so much better because they've only gotten used to the sport specific spring floor rebounding. You know what I mean? I
Mm.
think that they have a huge, you know, possible force one and also like a little bit more of an elasticity component of that too. That if they train generally, everything would get better on the spring floor. But that's just my interpretation because they know how to use the springs. They don't know how to be elastic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because they can do like a
Yeah.
big box jump if they go rebound and box jump, but starting from nothing, they're
Yeah.
not so great.
On a spring floor, right, Emilie? They can do that on a spring
Even
floor.
on a spring floor, it's just if they don't use the rebound,
Yeah.
it really shows.
Yeah, I think this is a bigger picture problem in gymnastics is people learn how to use the spring floor really well, which is great. Don't get me wrong, versus like generally developing plyometric capacity and strength. But yeah, Diwesh, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. No. That clears up a lot for me. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. So it seems like their body's actual ability to create the stiffness and elasticity needs the work because they've relied so much, like Dave said, on using the actual surface to create that elasticity for them. So now, if you can actually improve your force production, which seems like, because you kind of said like the initial first jump is the hardest to get height on. So I would actually reverse exactly what I said at first. I think for your athletes, it seems like you want to start or you need to start with a little bit more of the force production. So think heavier squats, heavier deadlifts, heavier lunges to build that initial strength, and then teach those joints how to create that force and create a lot of it. So more amplitude, like you said, right? So that's going to be built with our seated dumbbell jumps, and then eventually you get rid of the dumbbells and maybe still do seated jump, but now you can obviously get a little bit higher because you don't have the weight of the dumbbells, right? And then from there, maybe you do, and we have videos of this in the course, maybe you start doing some depth drop, right? Starting on top of a box, jumping down from it, and then rebounding, because what that does is it creates a little bit more of what we call eccentric overload. So now you got to add more overload on top of your body and gravity, right? Because of the height that you're jumping off of. And you got to overcome that force of demand and jump again, right? So we're looking for less elasticity there. What we're looking for is we're kind of looking for control of that load that's overloaded on the way down, and then redirect that force upward. So that's kind of like that progression that I would take your athletes to. So something like a seated dumbbell jump, maybe just a seated jump, maybe just a regular vertical jump, and then like a depth drop jumping off the box and rebounding back up again with decent amount of knee and ankle bend.
Yep, absolutely.
And then to work on the plyometric piece, like the stiffness and elasticity piece, bring in the weighted pogos, the pogo jumps, and teach your athletes how to actually use and create tension within their Achilles and their knees, their patellar tendon, to create that like true elasticity and not rely so much on the spring floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super well said. I think in an ideal situation, Emilie, if you had 6 weeks, I don't know when you're at like in your season or competitive or summer, what else, but if you had 6 weeks, you'd put them through a really good strength program that has some of these like kind of more elastic stuff in the beginning. Like when Diwesh makes a program, he has some of the stuff in their warm up and they're bounding and jumping, but then they're going through primarily getting stronger, like building force, like in the off season of the 6 weeks, like especially now where we are in the States. So the ideal situation would be use 6 to 8 weeks to do a full cycle of squatting, split squats, single leg squats, step ups, like deadlifts, RDL, stuff like that, to just build their legs to be stronger while you're still kind of tuning some of that elasticity, and then funnel everything together into, okay, some we're going to do some of the force stuff, like Diwesh said, with seated dumbbell jumps. Other times you're going to do some of the more stiffness type stuff like that with rebounds. And then you would eventually just mush that all into trying to just get that to transfer to bigger jumps and bigger leaps of just doing drills and stuff like that. But the key here is that I think the problem that happens in gymnastics, and I'm not saying this is you, this is everywhere I go to, they see kids aren't jumping high enough. Let's jump right to the most advanced jumps and leaps and drills and splits up to panel mats and all sorts of crazy stuff. And they're training the thing that needs to get better by doing the thing. You know what I mean? And that's not going to ever get better, right? That's like saying like, okay, let's get better at full ends. Let's just do full ends until you get it right? No, you need take a step back drills and timing and air awareness and stuff, higher layout sets. It's the same thing here. Like you can't just do jumps and leaps to get better at jumps and leaps. You got to go all the way back down to the basics, like Diwesh said, and be like, okay, are these kids strong enough? Like they're growing and doing harder jumps and leaps. Is their strength ascending with that in terms of like, leg strength in general to produce more force to get higher, to get another half turn around? Because that's a lot of the times what I see is the issue is the jumps and leaps get harder. The leg strength typically doesn't have external loading and doesn't have a programmed periodization cycle in the summer. It's just going and going. So like the leaps and jumps get harder, but the kid's strength profile doesn't get better alongside of it because they're not lifting. They're not doing a nice comprehensive program. They're not training this elasticity and force together. So the problem is that they keep doing harder jumps and they can't make progress. So what do they typically do? They just do more volume, more jumps, more circuits, more leaps. And the thing that breaks down is the kids' joints, right? Like their joints can't handle the volume of jumps and leaps and active flexibility because you're pulling up this, right? But not increasing their capacity to do so. So I think, and Diwesh, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you have the time, I would really focus on developing the external loading. It sounds like you haven't really done some of the external loading with the weightlifting and stuff like that. So doing a good cycle of like, you do not need to do a lot. Twice per week is really all you need with a little bit of a program like you'll see in the course is split. So like squat and deadlift on opposite days, split squats, right? Step ups, accessory work, single leg RDLs, like just kind of fill in a basic program with moderate volume, not even that crazy heavy. And because they've never done that before, they're going to get a huge training effect, right? They're going to get a huge return on investment because they've never done that before. Like strength comes from force or from some of that velocity. As Diwesh said, you have crushed the velocity side of the bucket with training gymnastics against body weight. So if you give them a little dose of external loading, I bet you'll go through 6 weeks where they're like, oh my God, I'm kind of tired and sore and my jumps feel like crap and I'm not really going anywhere. But if you just let it be patient and you'll get through the end, when you get on the other side of a 6 to 8 week cycle and you give them a deload, then come back and work some of their jumps and leaps, you'll be like, whoa, this came out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Because you'll be training the force part of it, which they'll actually get a little stronger.
Yeah, I think what I hear is that I know what to do and what to train and how to do it, but I'm not really good with periodization.
Periodization. That's okay.
That word. So yeah, making like a really good schedule that I can follow and going cycles. I kind of go too much with the flow. I think I go with like how they feel right now. So if they have some injuries or if they are tired, I try to always adapt. But maybe I follow that too much and not enough planning.
Well,
so
that's good.
think
that's good. That means you're
challenge.
That means you're a kind, compassionate coach, because people go the other way. Some people don't listen to the athletes and that's called auto regulation, which is a very good way to approach your training, which is like you have a plan, but you're flexible based on how the kids feel. Some people go the other way where like, this is the plan and you're doing it. So figure it out. Like that's not a good way to go. So, but that's okay. Let's make it for you now. Like that's the point of this is let's make your dream kind of situation come to life, which is like what you have in situation. So I will kind of give you the bird's eye view. And this is kind of, again, as you go through the course, you'll see this, but for your specific situation, I'll tell you what I think would be best in terms of like the coaching side and how many days to break it up. And then Diwesh can maybe fill in some gaps of like what he would do in the programs, right? So say So you have 4 days now or 5 right now? You're in the summer or no?
I'm 4 days, and we have 6 weeks of that program right now. I just began today, so
Perfect. This is amazing. This couldn't have come at a better time. So with it being 4 days, I would say you want to probably do 2 days of general kind of external loading and weightlifting type stuff like that, that has more general movements. And I would focus most of your eggs in that basket, right? And then the other 2 days, I would do gymnastics specific training for the normal kind of stuff you would do, right? And so you'll have 2 days where within that you'll have your loading stuff. And then the other 2 days, which is where you'll have like gymnastics specific shaping and core and all that kind of stuff. You still want to do all that kind of stuff. But I think within those 4 days, you can get both the general and the specific bucket. And just, you want to put more energy and time and effort into the general stuff because it's new. They've never done it. They're going to be more tired. And I would probably say take a week or 2 to just learn how to do it properly. Like, accept the fact that for 2 weeks, I always say it's like herding cats, right? You're not going to get them to probably do an effective training session because you're learning how to do stuff that's new. But then in 4 weeks, you could probably load them really well and then take a deload week. So if you go like 2 weeks of a ramp up, 3 weeks of going really, really aggressively to get them loaded, and then take 1 week as a deload week, you can transition them into the next thing. So, that's kind of like the bigger picture of periodization. I would say it's like you're just in this block right now. So 2 weeks of learning, 3 weeks of loading them pretty aggressively, and then 1 week of deloading and transitioning them to the next phase, but with 2 and 2 kind of side by side. So does that make sense? Kind of at a starting point?
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll let Diwesh talk about what would go into those 2 days because he's better at it, and it's probably better to hear from him.
Yeah. So from an organization and plugging in the exercises standpoint, the way that I would do it is make sure, one, they have a pretty good warm-up system. So this can include any like specific flexibility stuff that they might need to do, right, or anything like that, and then go into a little bit more like general stuff, right? So this could be like easy, like skipping stuff, like high knee type stuff, anything like that to kind of get the ankle and the knee joints going a little bit, because we are going to be starting with a little bit more jumps, right? So have a thorough warm up. Yes.
Can I stop you here with a question?
Yep.
We've been doing jumping rope in our warm-ups because the last years we've seen a lot of, on the front of the leg, in French it's periostite. I don't know how you call it, the problem on the front of the leg that hurts when you jump. So we've been seeing a lot of that, and the physical.
Sever's disease, the knee that we're talking about?
No, it's not the knee. It's really on the front of the lower leg.
Shin splints, probably.
That's it. So we've seen a lot of that in the last years, and therapists with whom we've been working told us that we could do a lot of jumping rope just to make more jumps and elasticity and stuff like that. So would you suggest that we continue doing that, or more like variety into that?
Question or answer, I should say. The first thing is that shin splints and all the things, shin splints, severs, and Osgoods, comes from the exact reason that we just talked about, which is the jumps and leaps and the volume get more, but the strength and the underlying profile doesn't. So you're already going to make it better by just thinking in general about getting them stronger with external loading and weights and doing like weightlifting. So that's the first thing to think about. Is it's not so much that the jump rope will help them cure their shin splints. It's that when you pull down on the high load volume of impact and you do some lower impact stuff like jumping rope, you just condition the shins to handle impact. Yeah. But the elasticity stuff of that Diwesh is talking about, the pogo jumps, the hurdle hops, are literally the exact same thing I give for rehab for shin splints, because that's the problem, is that the gymnastics is here. Like their tolerance is down here, whether it's just, they're growing or the skills are harder. So we use pogo hops and all the external loading and squats and deadlifts, stuff like that, to build up their capacity to here. So in answer to your question, I wouldn't not do jump roping. I think it's a great way to maybe warm them up for some of their, like what's to come later in their plyometric program for their block. I would just say, I don't think you're doing this, but I think some people think, oh, shin splints, if we just jump rope, that'll make them go away. That's not the case, right? So yes, you're doing it right, but just remember that the context is important. Yeah. The other thing I want to add too is in this session, we're talking about 2 days of practice. What Diwesh is talking about is only going to be 45 minutes at the end of practice for your strength and conditioning. You're still going to have a full general warm up where you can do tons of stuff. So like, I think in an ideal world, it'd be like a 30-minute warm up with, soft tissue stuff and some light running and jogging and all that, and kicks and dynamic warm up. You could do some plyos in the beginning to get them ready for like the events. You would have full events, and then you would have this at the end. So his warm up is like a 15-minute chunk of this 45-minute section within a large 3.5-hour practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Because he's probably gonna talk about like some warm up and like elastic jumps and stuff like that. But I don't want you to think that this warm up is like the practices warm up.
Yeah.
Just like the end here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Think specific for the strength conditioning piece. And then the last thing that I will touch on with the shin splints, right? I think Dave nailed it. So again, it's being able to handle the entire spectrum of what is required from like a force absorption standpoint, right? So the jumping rope helps you get ready for that elastic component. The piece that's missing is probably the slow, heavy force, right? So your athletes are probably going to benefit a ton from standing and seated calf raises that are done really heavy, right? So if shin splints is an issue, I would say that in this strength conditioning program that we're building out, that includes squats and all that stuff, I would say let's make sure that we plug in standing and seated calf raise variations too that are just done really heavy and slow, right? We can't forget that. So we'll touch on that. So yeah, so once we get through that warm-up section, that's a little bit more specific to the strength conditioning piece. Again, like skipping, any like light hopping, any light bounding to get ready for it. That'll work really well. Just make sure that it's done a little bit less intense, right? And then right after that, the section that I would go into is a little bit more true power development, right? So for this first 6 weeks, what I would do is day 1 of the week, right? Start with some sort of a seated dumbbell jump, and maybe pair that up with, do you guys have med balls or anything at the gym? You do. Okay. So what you can do is, I actually like doing this, especially with beginner athletes that haven't really done a whole lot of strength training. I like teaching them how to create a lot of force, but then also going the other way so that they know how to absorb force and decelerate almost that same motion, right? So I love pairing up like a seated dumbbell jump and pairing that up with like a straight up overhead med ball slam going down to the floor, right? So the seated dumbbell jump takes you from triple flexion, we call it bending from the ankle, knee, and hip, into triple extension, which is the opposite, extending through the ankle, knee, and hip. This med ball slam going down does the exact opposite of where you start in triple extension, being up on your toes, knees straight, hips all the way through, and then going down into a powerful position there, right? So those are 2 things that you can pair up. And then maybe on day B, what you do is maybe, let's say we need to prioritize a little bit more single leg power. Maybe we'll do what we call a step up jump. I don't know if you've seen that, where you step 1 foot up on a smaller box and then propel yourself off of just 1 leg. So it's a single leg jump variation, right? So that's another one that is used to create a little bit more force production. And then maybe pair that up with, let's say that, either shin splints or, hips are still an issue. We can plug in something like that, like a heavy calf raise or some sort of a balance or stability drill. Or if we want to really focus on power, maybe we do like an overhead toss with a medicine ball, right? To keep working that triple extension, but adding a little bit more of an upper body component as well. So that would be like the start to my power sections. If we want to keep this nice, short and sweet, that's all you need for like your power section, right? So jumps on day 1 paired up with a med ball drill, some jumps and a med ball drill or a stability drill paired on day 2, right? And then the rest of it for me, I would say, is make it very, very strength heavy. So thanks, Dave. That's perfect. So this is a little template that I wrote up for our course. You'll see that 2A, 2B that you see on the reaction power section, right? So that was our closing power. So again, the med ball slam going down, and then let's say our seated dumbbell jump right below that. And then if we want to stick to the similar format here, that lower body plyo would just be like let's say, so on this day, I would actually do like a 1 leg pogo jump and keep it a little bit lower intensity at this phase because we're focused a little bit more on the the force and strength component, right? And then throw in whatever sort of core work or hip work or even ankle work that you want to do there, right? So that's anything that you can really, plug in as almost like a filler is what we could call it, to make sure that you get enough rest between the other two. And then on day B, right, so we have that opening core power. So that would be an overhead med ball toss, and pair that up with, for you, I would actually say let's do a single leg force production jump here, like a step up jump for 2B.
What do you want for this one? Sorry, I was muted and I was talking to myself and I didn't realize.
For this, probably some sort of like a hip care or ankle care or stability drill, right? So that we don't keep crushing power, and then they're so fatigued that they can't really give enough effort for the strength lift, the strength portion. Side plank clam is perfect. And then on day 2, right, so we could do like a lateral 2-leg pogo jumps. So again, working a little bit more plyometric, but we're adding a little bit more of a coordination piece. We're adding in a little bit more stiffness in different planes. And then for 3B, probably the same thing, like some sort of a hip cuff or lateral core or ankle care. Goblet toe taps, something like that is perfect.
And Emily, we have videos for all these kind of things online too, so we can make sure we link up videos for all this stuff for you.
Perfect.
And then the biggest piece is going to be our resistance section, right? So this is where I would spend like the remaining 30 minutes that hopefully you have after going through your warm up, and spending about 15 minutes on the reaction power stuff. So I would do, for your beginners, I'm sure you don't have like a crazy gym that you have access to, but some squats, sets of maybe 8 if your people haven't really been doing a whole lot of weightlifting. I would say 6 to 8, and load it pretty heavy, right? As long as they start to look good. If the form looks good, start challenging them a little bit more. And then on day B, some sort of a RDL or kettlebell deadlifts or whatever you have access to. If you only have dumbbells, just do dumbbell RDLs. If you have access to kettlebells, like a kettlebell deadlift off the floor is a great way to build starting strength. And then for again, 1B, again, this is somewhere you can be a little bit more creative as a gymnastics coach. You can say, all right, I need to build anti-extension strength. Maybe I'll do, for us, it would be something as basic as like a plank with like an arm march, right? Where we set up in a forearm plank, we reach the arms forward. And that creates, gravity forces you to have to want to arch your back a little bit more, and you're trying to stay hollowed.
Something like that. Wall press dead bug, maybe?
Yeah, we can do wall press dead bug, nice and simple. And then day B, we can do like a dead bug plate pullover if we want to stick to like really true anti-extension and get something a little bit more specific for overhead.
Keep in mind we're going to do core every day, probably in every warm up. So like these core things are very specific to the general stuff that 90% of gymnasts aren't doing in their warm ups or like on side drills and like during their normal conditioning days. So there'll be like tons of other core stuff that you'll do the rest of the week. I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah. And then for 2B, I would honestly, for you guys, it sounds like they're a little bit more beginner on the strength training. I would go 1-leg hip lift. All right, keep it nice and simple. If you want to weight it a little bit, you can hold the dumbbell right up at their hip. We've been using, I don't know if you guys have TRX straps. We've been using TRX straps hooked onto a couple of kettlebells, and the kettlebells almost just drape off to the side. We have a video showing that in the course too. And then pair that up with maybe some sort of like a weighted push up. Throw a plate on there, or if you have access to dumbbells, again, like a floor press laying down on the ground, just a dumbbell, above your chest. And then finish off with some sort of a single leg squat off of a box for that squat pattern, in that 3B or 3A rather, sorry. And then like a TRX row here for 3B, or, band row in a kneeling position or a standing position. And then if we go over to day B, that lunge pattern, I would keep it very simple. Again, for beginners, I like to go just like a goblet, so holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell up here by the chest, keep it nice and close to you, split squat. So just already in that lunge position, and we don't even have to go back and forth from it. Just go straight up and down, keeping your weight mostly on that front leg. That's a big one to keep in mind, because for a split squat or a lunge, we're trying to load more so that front leg. So just weight shifting forward into that front leg and just going straight up and down on a split squat. And then maybe pairing that up with like a band assisted pull up, or, a band pull down, whatever makes sense. For the advanced athletes, like the level 9s, 10s that you have, the 16, 17-year-olds, maybe do the pull ups. For the younger kids that, you want to save some of the strength work for some of the skill work that you're doing, maybe have them do a pull down with a band.
I think 8 here, Diwesh. 12 seems aggressive.
Oh yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, probably 8 on each side, or 8 total if you're doing a pull up. And then for the horizontal press here, I would do some sort of like a bilateral, so both arms working at the same time, make it a little bit more specific. And here's kind of where I differ my thoughts a little bit. For my more advanced athletes, I would probably actually do like a vertical press here, because I can trust them that they can maintain a really good torso position, meaning they can maintain that hollow position and not cheat through their lumbar spine. If it's a beginner, that's probably one of the more tougher things to coach for a younger athlete. They tend to really default into that arch. That's just where they're more comfortable. So I don't mind doubling down on a horizontal press again, and maybe do another weighted push-up or a dumbbell floor press. But for the advanced athlete, I would go vertical. And then lastly, this is where I would love to throw in like a suitcase carry, so you get a little bit of grip out of it, and you get to build a little bit more lateral core. So you're just resisting side bend there.
Which is also, in the context, super important for single leg jumping and landing, right? Like the lateral hip is one of the more overlooked things to, like, why do you fall off beam? Like whether you're either like completely off, or if your leg can't keep you stable because your hip drops off to the side. So super important one.
Yeah. So something like this for your specific girls, that this will probably take care of, that missing force component. So I'm willing to bet you that if you do a program that's pretty similar to this for the next 6 weeks, and maybe if they're pretty smoked, like Dave said, take a deload on that last week, this will probably start to give you a little bit of an improvement in your jump height.
Mm-hmm. And then I'll send you this template too, Emilie, because on this side, Diwesh made the general templates. I made templates for practice. So like, this is your like general warm up, do some lines, like whatever you want to do on the events and side stations for drills. And then I have, like, for gymnastics specific stuff down here, you can fill in lower body, upper body, core for whatever you think is really good for them to work on. That's very specific to gymnastics, right? So like, I might have somebody do some very specific like panel mat plyos, or some snap down rebounds like that way, or like some in and out panel mat jumps, which are more the velocity side in the spring, but just creating body tension. And then up here, it'd be much more like, specific to the actual stuff, right? Or cast handstand, and then core, V-ups, and all that kind of stuff. So I would say, you and I could probably have a 2-hour discussion on our favorite gymnastic specific drills, and we do not need to teach you that, because we have a bajillion of them online if you want to learn more. But I feel like you could knock this out, because you already probably know exactly what you want to do for practice. So I would say spend some time learning and watching the videos for this kind of stuff, because like this will take you a week to learn how to teach these things and feel comfortable. And like, if you just like look at the sections of the course, if you don't have time right now, just look at the lower body, like squatting and hinging stuff. And then kind of you'll have this program to work with. Just because Diwesh walks through in the course, like, okay, how do you cue a squat? How do you skew a split squat? What do you do if someone's ankles are really stiff and they can't squat low safely? You put them on heel elevation. So maybe just watch the lower body section of the course real quick and kind of get yourself up to speed to watch these kind of things. Cause you could honestly implement this program tomorrow. Like, you could literally start teaching them this tomorrow. And then this whole first week, just know it's not going to be super productive and it's going to be hard. But then next week, you could actually start getting the ball rolling. And then you'd have those 3 weeks where you could actually load them up really, really well. So take this, and which we'll put in the Dropbox folder as well. And then we'll send this to you. And then you can look at the videos and then fill this in as well about, okay, like what events do I have for the 4 days this week? And what do I want to do in warm up? What do I want to do for like lines and kicks and jumps? What events do I have? What side stations and drills can I do? What do I want to do for my programming on these 2 days? You only need 2 days here for this strength component. So like, it'll be Monday. This will be a strength day with Dewey. And then your third day. And then this will be a strength day with Dewey. And that's kind of something we should have mentioned too. Is I would suggest your first day, is a medium day of the gymnastics specific stuff. Your second day is a harder day of the general stuff with Diwesh, because that's going to be very high intensity for them. And then the third day is another medium day for gymnastics. The fourth day, before they have a couple of days off on the weekend, is the second hard day that Diwesh does, because that's going to by far and away be the more stressful thing for them to do versus like the other way around. So for these next 6 weeks, I would prioritize the strength stuff that Diwesh just talked about, and then kind of leave this. But you're going to have, you know, all 4 days of events. I would put core in every warm up. I would put flexibility in every warm up, and obviously stuff like that. But I think that would be probably a better way to go about it. And you don't really need the active flexibility as much, because you said it looks like it's pretty good, but just understand that they're going to be a little stiff probably for the next couple of weeks as they get used to the new program.
Trying to do more specific also with the things we're working on. So if we do more jumps, we'll go like more calves and hips and whatever to make the flexibility more adapted to what we've been working on.
Yep.
But yeah, with everything that I've seen is like, it's not new. I think my problem is that I just want to be more original and always changing, and I don't fall into routine. So I think it's just for me to see that it's important to follow a certain program and stuff. So I think it's going to be really a good test this summer to see how it works for them, and then we can do more of that during the season. So
yeah, well, I think you're halfway there. Like, you really have the ideas down. You just need a roadmap. You just need some structure and an outline to get you there. And I think this is not your fault. This is human nature, but definitely gymnastics is they always think, change this, new drills, new exercises, new leaps, new jumps. I saw this on YouTube. This looks cool at a Congress. And they keep throwing new stuff at the athletes versus just sticking to the basics and doing those really, really well. And this is the same problem that people have with skill training, right? Is like, they want to learn, I don't even know. They want to learn Yurchenko, right? And they have like 5 drills they really like that are really effective. They teach them for one day, they use them for another day. And then the third or fourth day, they're like, oh, these are boring, or the kids are getting boring. And so they move to another set of drills, right? And there's nothing wrong with a bunch of different drills that work on the same thing. But if you keep constantly changing the drill, the kids don't learn how to do it well, and they move on, they don't get it, and they're confused, right? Like, you have to kind of stick to super well done basics every single day for like 3 to 4 weeks to get a training adaptation. It's the same thing with strength and conditioning. Like, we know that squats and deadlifts and lunges and step ups and stuff will get you stronger, right? So like, maybe you could do a goblet split squat one day, or a different version of a split squat. You could start to change the elevation in a couple of weeks. You could do some different stuff to not make it so monotonous. But at the same time, we kind of know with literature what makes your legs stronger, and we should probably follow that for most of it, right? And so I would say, yeah, stick to it for 6 weeks and see how they go. I also would say, try to get some measurements. Like I said, have them all do seated dumbbell jumps, and then have them all do a reactive depth jump, just drop off and jump as high as they can, and do some stiffness measurements, and just see pre and post if you notice a difference in objectively their jumps and their leaps. But then also if you see a difference in their metrics, because when they see that, they're like, oh, my jumps and leaps feel higher, and they're easier, and they look prettier, and I'm also jumping higher. Like, I think they're bought in more. And so I think I would start with some pre-test stuff, and then I would go through the 6 weeks, then I would do some post-test stuff.
Yeah.
Good idea.
And then one thing that is just, I think, a nice reminder that this is actually something that I tell my interns all the time, right? Because I take on interns that are very wide-eyed. They want to learn all this stuff. They look at all this stuff online. They see a bunch of stuff on Instagram, on YouTube and stuff. The question that I always ask when it's time to make that new program and you want to throw new exercises in there is this new exercise better than that old one that you're doing? Is it definitely better? Is that the best option? Right? Because if it's not, guess what? There's nothing wrong with sticking with the same stuff.
Yeah.
Like, to give you an example, like my gymnast will do a goblet squat until they run out of a dumbbell that they can't hold anymore. Like, once they get to a 95-pound dumbbell squat here, right? Obviously they can't hold anything heavier because it's just so big. That's when I give them the new one. Right.
Yeah.
That's when I give them a barbell in their hands. Right. For a lunge, it's like, well, you can hold a dumbbell by your side really, really heavy for a long time. Right. Why do we need to do something way, way more fancy if that same thing is going to make you stronger? Right.
I think it's more easy to accept, like with the drills. I've been learning a lot and saying, like, we'll keep the drills that we know are working and we work this way. But with the PP, it's like, the culture around it was like a punishment before for them. So we've been trying to change that, but to change that, we made it more fun, and to make it more fun, we make it like a little bit like different every day. So now that the culture has changed, I think I can get back to the basics and stick with it more for my athletes more than the younger ones. But yeah, I'll definitely try that and make the test. That's gonna bring a lot of motivation also.
And that's such a good point you mentioned that. And sorry, Diwesh, to jump in real quick. But when we did this, when we added this is brand new to our gym 5-6 years ago. No one had lifted. It was parents were very against it. The kids didn't know. What we thought was going to be one of like the pulling teeth points of their program was the most fun. And I literally just filmed the podcast with 3 of our former gymnasts talking about this. They loved the strength stuff. They loved the new stuff, the lifting, because it was different than boring gymnastics stuff all over again. It was one of the favorite things that they did because it was exciting. It was new. They could work in groups together and pump each other up. It was really, really enjoyable for them to do. So I think that would be, something that's actually a highlight for them, these 2 days a week that are new and different than just like another circuit or another flexibility complex.
Yeah, I think it's more my mindset that I need to change than theirs. Like they're going to be all in for that. So
kudos to you, because jumping off the cliff with the unknown is tough. Yeah. Is there anything else on your mind related to this? Or I don't want you to leave and feel like you didn't get your questions answered or that you're overwhelmed or something.
Well, I would maybe go more specific for the one leg leap that we do. I think I might have a little problem explaining or understanding them, like they run and then the movement that they do to start the leap. I think it gets them a lot of propulsion, like they go really far, and I have a problem to translate that to the height. And I guess it goes with the strength also, but maybe something in the way I explain it to like make it stop to bring back the rebound, or I struggle with my words, but
yeah, you're good.
The same kind of thing that you do for doing like a front tuck, you just explain them how to punch to make it look like you're going backward, but the leaps I maybe struggle with that. Do you have some things that you tell your gymnasts to make them work better with the height instead of the length?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. So the first piece of it is that, every program needs a squat and a hinge, right? It needs a good double leg squat and a good double leg hinge. But the piece about this is that kind of with your program, we already did it, and you could tweak it even a little bit more, is just add more single leg strength focus into it, right? So like adding in a single, like what is that first jump off the floor? It's a half squat. It's a half single leg squat, right? To jump as high as you can off one leg. So by doing step ups and step downs and RDLs, you're going to develop the hamstrings, the glutes, and a single leg weighted hip lift, like Diwesh said, is one of the best things that most gymnasts are not doing, because we're so good at developing the quads. And a lot of people will do hamstrings with like physio ball or sliders, but nobody is doing direct glute max training for a single leg hip lift. And Brett Contreras and other people have argued like that's better for horizontal force displacement, but you still need that for vertical power. So I think that's the most important first, is realizing that I think right now you're trying to cue somebody out of something they physically can't do because they're not strong enough, right? So like if you're saying jump higher or stop your momentum or push up as high as you can, there's only so much that they can ascend into what you're asking them to do before it plateaus. And this is another problem I see in the gymnastics community is we just make the box jump higher and higher and higher and say jump, 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 or put more panel mats up on their leap drill and say jump, jump, jump. But like they physically can't jump higher. Like they're trying as hard as they can to push into the floor and jump as high as they can. And the physiological limiter is the bottleneck, right? They're not strong enough. So I think that's the first thing to do is kind of take yourself off the hot plate, right? Because you're saying like, what can I say to make them better? I'm doing all the drills. It's physiological. You need to get them stronger. So I think that's the first thing to realize is by doing squat and hinge and then single leg RDL, like Diwesh said, step up, step down, single leg hip lift. By just doing that for 4 weeks and then literally doing the exact same drills with the exact same cues you're giving now, they're going to get better because they're stronger, right? That's just physiology. So that's the first thing. That being said, I do think just like front and back tumbling, you have to think about the position of their shoulders in relation to their feet, right? If that kid runs and hits the springboard of the floor and their shoulders are tipped over their feet, you can say whatever you want. They're not going to go they're not going to go any more, you know, up versus forward. So I think I'm personally a fan of creating drills that you don't need to have perfect cueing for it to go well. It's called constraints. You just put a block setup where they're going to take one step onto a panel mat maybe, and they're going to skip straight up in the air versus going over something, right? And I think that's important to remember is like, take a panel mat and then put another spotting block in front of it, not for them to jump onto, but just so they literally can't go any farther forward. So put a panel mat on the side, like this way, and a spotting block on its side, and just say, put 1 foot on the front of this panel mat and skip as high as you can. Don't worry about a leap. Don't worry about, you know, jumping over this. Don't worry about clearing it. It's just like a step up skip jump we would do in our plyo program or in our performance program, and just do that. Just do that for like a couple turns. And then once they do that, move the mat back away and do the exact same thing, and then add a leap on top of that, right? So you're separating the chunks of what needs to happen. Get off the floor, then do your leap, which is oftentimes, especially on beam, is like cheat the corner, rush as fast as I can, right? So like work on just the steps prep for the skip. And then once they get there, say, okay, now don't lose the skip jump. Now add in whatever you're doing like that. And I think that's probably a better way to do it than trying to find the perfect cue or shoulder or eye position. Like that stuff's important. But if you just put them in a position where they can't, you know, do anything to get away with it, I think that's going to be better. Like doing them in hoops is another great example too. Like take the small preschool hoops and say you have to like literally take off and land in the hoop. So like that's the goal, is to step and take off and land in the hoop off the panel mat. And I think when we moved away from just make it higher, just make it harder, just keep doing more different new drills like switch leaps up to resis or stuff like that, what we got were things that looked like they were the right thing. And then when they actually went over to the actual floor, it didn't show up. So I would just, again, like the bigger picture here is like develop the pieces first to make them be able to jump higher, which is the first hour. But then from there, let's try to strip out, you know, the jumping versus the leaping.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bravo. Makes sense. I think now that you have this in mind, when you go through the course and just peek around a little bit, you're like, oh, okay, this makes a lot more sense and it will help a lot more. But I know you're tight on time, so.
Yeah, but I'll do it this summer because I want to bring that up in September and start with that. So yeah, I'll do that for sure.
Fantastic. Anything else we can do for you or no?
That's great for me. Thanks a lot for taking the time. It was really nice.
Yeah, no problem. And don't be a stranger, right? Like you're in the discussion group and you have, you know, emails and stuff. So I don't want you to like do this, then be lost forever. Like reach out to me and Diwesh on HQ or post in the forum and let us know how you're doing. Because we would like to see the progress. If you get 4 weeks down the road and you're like, this 80% of this makes sense, but this is really confusing. I don't know what I'm doing, or like something seems off. Like, please let us know, because we just want you to, you know, obviously do well. This is not like okay, good job with your consult, go away. Like we actually want you to be.
Yeah.
Okay. So
thanks a lot for that.
Don't feel worried to reach out or email and stuff like that.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
All right. Sounds good, Emilie. Thank you.
It's nice to meet you.
Have a nice day.